That's not Melanie. So I'm Melanie Rabaki. I'm a corporate partner over at Perkins Coie. This is Matt. He's one of my colleagues. He's the one that does all the hard labor, like I told you guys the first night that we're here. And our presentation is going to be on basically traps for the unwary. And so we're going to try to make it a little bit fun today. As you can see, I have a great snapshot.
Just stand there.
That's me. And let's see, I'm not sure how to get the video started, but our first thing, we're going to start with, and that, yeah, let's make sure we get those things. So did anyone see Bad Teacher? Anyone see Bad Teacher? Okay, we're just going to do a video.
I see the bad.
Mark! He's wired in. Sorry? He's wired in. Is he? Yes. How about that? Are you still wired in? You issued 24 million new shares of stock. You were told that new investors came along. How much were your shares diluted? How much were his?
What was Mr. Zuckerberg's ownership share diluted down to?
It wasn't.
What was Mr. Moskowitz's ownership share diluted down to?
It wasn't.
What was Sean Parker's ownership share diluted down to?
It wasn't.
What was Peter Thiel's ownership share diluted down to?
It wasn't.
And what was your ownership share diluted down to?
0.03%.
Ooh! How'd that happen?
You signed the papers. You said it, yeah? You're gonna blame me because you were the business head of the company and you made a bad business deal with your own company? This is gonna be like I'm not a part of Facebook.
It won't be like you're not a part of Facebook. You're not a part of Facebook.
My name's on the masthead.
You might want to check again.
It's because I froze the account.
I think we were gonna let you parade around in your ridiculous suits pretending you were running the
Sorry! My bras at the cleaners! Along with my hoodie and my flip-flops! You pretentious douchebag!
Security's here. You'll be leaving now.
I'm not signing those papers.
We will get the signature.
Tell me this isn't about me getting into the Phoenix. You did it. I knew you did it. You planted that story about the chicken.
I didn't plant the story about the chicken.
What's he talking about? You had me accused of animal cruelty.
Seriously, what the hell's the chicken?
And I'll bet what you hated the most is that they identified me as a co-founder of Facebook, which I am. You better lawyer up, asshole, because I'm not coming back for 30%. I'm coming back.
Lawyer out, asshole. Did you hear that?
It's okay, Will.
It's going to be our new motto. Lawyer up, asshole.
Hang on.
God. Here's your $19,000. I wouldn't cash it though. I drew it on the account you froze.
I like sitting next to you, Sean. Makes me look so tough.
Okay, so like, does everyone like kind of get the, okay, so who's seen the movie first off? Okay. So do you kind of get what's happening in the movie? So they start a company together and they don't like have it all dialed in, right? Paperwork's not done, everyone loves each other, you know, it's all good. And then they kind of do a bait and switch on them. Yeah. So anyway, so we're going to talk about how to kind of avoid some of those problems. Because as you're starting your companies, there's lots of just annoying lawyer legal stuff that if you're not careful, some of you in the room know me well, and so you've probably heard this before, and Matt can probably recite it, but there's two things that tear a company apart: success and failure. And so we're going to try to walk you through some things that you can do from the legal side to kind of avoid some of those problems.
So first of all, there's lots of different kinds of lawyers out there. And Melanie and I are business lawyers, we're corporate lawyers. And so we work with businesses on a day-to-day basis in trying to prevent forest fires. We're like Smokey the Bear, right? And then litigators come in when there actually is a fire. So we helicopter them in and they put out those fires. But from a day-to-day perspective, it's the business lawyer's job to try to prevent fires from ever occurring. And so I'm sure sometimes our clients feel that we're just nagging on them or we're getting on them for no reason, but really it's
Like they have nothing better to do.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But really what we're trying to do is to keep them safe and to keep them out of trouble so that they're not dealing with the situations like we just saw in the social network. So the first thing we want to talk to you about, when you're starting a business, you have an idea, right? You have an idea, but you need to somehow form an entity in order to house that idea. Now an entity, there's lots of benefits to having an entity. The first of which is whether it's a corporation, a limited liability company, which we call LLCs, whether it's a limited partnership, that's more rare. But the benefit to particularly a corporation or an LLC is the idea of limited liability. And that will be really important as we talk through some of these problems or some of these issues that new companies face. Having that limited liability, which means that you personally, as an owner of the company, as a founder or shareholder, are not liable for the company's debts. And there's exceptions to that for sure. But typically there's that shield that protects you personally from being liable for the debts of the company. So, in a worst case scenario, if the company doesn't succeed, and it goes belly up and it fails, you personally are not going bankrupt. You don't have to pay for the debts of the company. So that's why everyone says, first thing, it's important to form an entity and to form it quickly so that both your ideas and, more importantly, you yourself are protected. So, so that kind of takes us through the first one, avail yourself of liability protection. The second one, which is really important, and as we just saw in the video clip, is that typically, a lot of times, there's more than one person who wants to start a company. So for example, you yourselves here today, you're starting a company with a number of people, right? All of you are the founders of the company. And if without an entity, it's tough to determine who owns what, how much does someone own. When you form an entity, if it's a corporation, you have shares. And you can issue out those shares according to how much you want someone to own within that entity or that that corporation. So maybe if there's two people, it's a 50-50 split. We always hate to see that for reasons we'll talk about a little bit later. But typically there's some sort of a percentage ownership that's allocated to the individuals participating.
And it's always 100%.
It's always 100%.
It's never 80. It's not 110. And it's 100%. At all times, it is 100%. Somebody owns it.
That's exactly right. And so when people come to us and they say, hey, I've got this idea, I want to start a business, then the first thing we sit down with them typically is we say, okay, what kind of entity do you want? And we walk them through the tax reasons for why a corporation might be better suited to them, or a limited liability company might be better suited for their particular venture. And then we talk to them about who's going to be involved with this, right? Who's with you on this? Who's providing the money? Who's providing the know-how and the services? And then we try to get to sit them down and have that uncomfortable conversation of how much do you own, how much does Molly own, how much does Joe own?
The common answer is always, we're going to share equally.
That's right. That's right.
Because we're all contributing equally.
Which sounds great initially, but it
Absolutely.
very rarely turns out that way.
Just like every school project you've ever been on, somebody doesn't carry their weight, and somebody is always doing all the work.
That's right.
Or at least in their head.
And then finally, so adhere to corporate formalities. This gets to what I alluded to a little bit earlier, which is you personally are protected from liability if you own an entity, provided that you, what we call adhere to corporate formalities, meaning you're not intermingling the company's money with your own personal money. If it's a corporation, you're actually holding meetings.
You're not paying for your mortgage out of the corporate bank
Exactly.
account. What? Who would do that? Oh my gosh. None of our clients.
And so if you don't, I mean, because an entity is like a person, right? It's treated like a person for tax purposes and otherwise. And so if you have blurred lines between yourself and the entity, then the courts will treat that blurred line like a blurred line. They'll say, okay, well, if you're treating the company's funds like your own personal piggy bank, you know, when the company goes belly up or there's a lawsuit or something else against the company and the company doesn't have the money to pay for it, we're going to treat your personal piggy bank like the company's piggy bank, and they'll come back after you. So, but as long as you adhere to those corporate formalities, you're protected from that liability. Okay, this is still on. So, choosing the right entity structure, there's a number of considerations that you need to think about. We're not going to go into detail about these things. But first of all, you need to look at what's the business purpose. The liability protection, we just talked about that. Liability protection, both an LLC and a corporation have the same liability protection. Financing an investment is important. What do you want to do with your entity? Is this just like a kind of a mom and pop store? If it's a mom and pop store, then you probably don't care about what kind of entity it is for purposes of venture capitalists or private equity firms coming in and investing into your company. However, if you are looking for investment, then, you know, nowadays, I have to be careful saying this because nowadays I think it's not as important as it once was, but typically people love to see Delaware C corporations. A C corporation simply means it's a corporation tax under subchapter C of the Internal Revenue Code, which means corporate profits are taxed at both the corporate level and at the shareholder level when profits are distributed to shareholders. Nowadays, it's not quite as important. We see LLCs all the time receiving angel investment, venture capital investment. Melanie likes to say that, you know, if you have a really good idea and you have a really good company, investors care a lot less about what kind of entity you own, a lot more about how
They may tell you that they care, but that's just their polite way of saying no thanks.
That's right.
He's really cute, but...
Ownership and control. So it's different. Corporations and LLCs, you kind of structure them very similarly, but there's different terminology. So for your companies that you're going to be starting for the winners, it's going to be LLCs. And there's some tax reasons for that, as well as just structural. LLCs are a lot more flexible than corporations.
I say, I bet our buddies in the back will agree to that. A lot more we can do.
For 6 more weeks. Just keep us out.
So with LLCs, you can just be a lot more flexible in the structure. Melanie always says, I'm stealing all of her lines, but an LLC is like giving a baby a bazooka. Because they're so flexible and there's so many things you can do with it that people sometimes get in trouble with LLCs because
Too much.
They're trying to do too much with it and then they get, you know, head over heels into it and it gets complicated. And corporations are very simple and most of you are familiar with it. You've got a board of directors, you have officers who run the day-to-day company, and then you have shareholders who are the owners. And you issue out shares, which can either be common shares or preferred shares, which simply mean ownership that has some sort of preferred enhancement to it, whether it's voting rights or distribution rights or what have you. So, you know, we see lots of both, and we really don't have a preference either way, whether it's a corporation or LLC. It just really determines on what you're trying to do with that company as to which entity we suggest. Sorry. On a taxation level, I mentioned LLCs. LLCs can be really beneficial, at least early on in a company's life, where there's going to be losses. Because you know, for reasons that the accountants will talk about
in 6 weeks.
In 6 weeks.
Apparently the groundhog saw Shadow.
Yeah.
Guys, come on, hello!
The losses can be really beneficial because those can flow directly down to the owners of the LLC, which we call members. Finally, exit strategy. Are you planning to stay with your company for the next 20 years, or do you plan on starting a company, building it up, and in 5 years, selling it off? That can determine what kind of entity structure you have.
And by the way, this whole topic is, that is a seminar in and of itself. So we're really loading you down with a ton of stuff. So if you guys have questions or you want to stop along the way, because I'm getting no emotion. So if we put you to sleep already, because we got 5 more to go through. So I knew I should have started with that. Anyway, So next we're gonna, there we go, now we're laughing,
Laugh at me, laugh at me.
Let's make fun of Dave. Okay, so next we're going to talk about defining owner, and Matt started to talk a little bit about this, but we're going to talk about defining owner contributions and expectations. This is just so very important, and one of the things that we always tell clients is, you know, let me ask the audience, who can kind of give me the statistic on how many marriages are successful, don't end in divorce? 50, give or take. Okay, so what do you think the chances of your partnership is with someone that you didn't marry? Yeah, right. I mean, like, we can all assume that the statistics got to be less, right? So this is why it's important to nail down these types of points in your relationship early. Do it when you're on the same page, you're rowing in the same boat, and you're excited. And that's one of the things that we're going to work on with you guys as you're forming your company. And there's a lot of things that you kind of need to consider when you're defining your ownership and what. You know, one thing is, you know, the value of the contributions. I mean, we kind of joked about it, but I mean, honestly, like 9 out of 10 people come into our office and are like, if there's 3 of them, it's going to be a third, a third, a third. If there are 4, it's going to be 25%, 25%, 25%. And when we walk them through, okay, but what are the contributions that you're each giving? They kind of all sit back, because there's always the one person who kind of sits back and, you know, in his back of his mind is like, oh, I'm really contributing 40%. But I want to keep peace, so I'm going to keep it at 25, 25, 25. And then there's somebody else who's like, you know, I'm so committed to this, and as soon as this company's making money, I'm going to leave my day job, and then I'm going to start doing this. You know, I mean, this is every startup we've ever worked with. And what eventually happens is strife. I mean, eventually it starts to chafe against the partnership. You got somebody who's committed their time and they're getting 50%, and somebody who's still pulling down their big salary at Micron, you know what I mean, and waiting to leave the company. And that starts to chafe on the relationship, right? So we always encourage people right up front, let's talk about your contributions. Let's talk about who's really putting what in, and let's really try to be honest with each other about what we think those contributions are. Here's a big one that we deal with folks all the time. One of the biggest things that plagues startups is they don't have money. They don't have money, right? So you've come from your big job, you're making 6 figures somewhere, and now you're going to go help somebody, and you're not going to get 6 figures anymore. So the natural inclination of the company is to pay in stock, okay? So, and that's great, and it rewards people. But one of the things that you need to think about is, you know, again, what are all the contributions that people are putting into the company? Is somebody putting real money in because the company needs capitalized? Is somebody putting in, you know, intellectual property? You know, they're the ones that created the widget. It's their, you know, their idea, their what's it, who's it, whatever it is, right? And then there's somebody who's putting in sweat equity. How do we, you know, value those different contributions? And if somebody's putting in services, it's taxable. It's taxable just like as if I give you stock, and that stock has $1 value, it's as if I've given you $1. So you have to, there's tax ramifications to that. That person has to, you know, the company has to withhold, and that person needs to pay taxes on it. Well, you know, is that stock really worth $1? I mean, does it feel like it's worth $1? Because we don't even know if the company's gonna, you know, if anything's gonna happen. So these are the kinds of things that we, you know, like to work through with folks. Whereas if I'm contributing money or property, that's basically, that can be tax-free. That's not something somebody's going to be paying taxes on. So a lot of times entrepreneurs, particularly if this is their first company, they haven't encountered these issues. They don't know that. So they're just giving stock out like Pez. And it makes sense, but there's a whole host of issues that come with that. Memorialize the agreement. This is what's happening, you know, like on the Facebook example. This is what's happening with every startup. People come in, they have an arrangement, they've agreed to it, it's on a series of emails, it was part of a conversation, somebody has a text, but they don't memorialize it. They don't put it in writing. And this isn't a pitch to come use us. This is, go talk to anybody. Talk to your dad if he's a lawyer. Talk to whomever. Talk to somebody who understands agreements. Because, again, 9 times out of 10, when you see it in writing, somehow it doesn't feel and seem exactly the same way as the conversation we were having, right? Because people hear what they want to hear in a conversation, right? Who in here is married? Okay? Okay, who's gone and have a conversation with their spouse and you're like thinking you're having the same conversation and the next day you're like, were you not in the same room with me? Did we not have this conversation? This is what happens all the time. People hear what they want to hear in a conversation. And then when you're in negotiations, people are just jazzed, man. I'm going to sell you this. I'm going to buy it for this much. You know, details be damned. You know what I mean? They just don't think through this stuff. And then all of a sudden you get the agreement and it makes it come to roost as to, well, wait, is that what they were really, wait, I didn't understand that when they said I had to sell my company, I can't go do anything for the next 5 years? I don't remember hearing that. Wait, when was that part of the conversation? So it's really important to just memorialize the agreement, particularly things like, hey, I want you to come work with me. I'm going to give you stock for services, but I expect you to do A, B, C. You know what I mean? You want to have that in writing, because when you do A and B and not C, we need to understand that you may not get what you thought you were going to get. And I certainly want it in writing because I don't want to pay.
But real quick, I was going to add, if a lot of times you see entrepreneurs who don't want to spend the money to have, you know, lawyers or accountants or other service professionals assist them in that whole startup process. And we always like to say, you can either spend the money up front or you can spend it on the back end for us to do all the cleanup. And I don't have any studies on this, but I would say almost guaranteed it's a lot more expensive to do it on the back end and to clean everything up than to just get professionals involved in the beginning to help you make sure that you're doing this according to laws.
Yeah, and one of the nice things about this program is you're going to get to see that in action without having to pay for it. And hopefully you'll understand the value of it. I think we decided this year we're actually going to create invoices so that you can see what it would actually cost you to get some of the stuff that we're going to go through down, so you can kind of get a sense of it. But that's a segue into our last topic, which is, you know, whether it's a lawyer or an accountant, you want to have good record-keeping habits. You want to, you know, as you're giving, we see this happen all the time, and I don't mean this to be trite or pick on entrepreneurs. We see people come in all the time, and they've given out lots of stock, but they haven't recorded it. I mean, I wish I could say this was like a joke, but I mean, I've had like at least half a dozen companies give more stock than they even have out to people, right? Like they have like 100 shares authorized and they've given like 250 out, you know? And it's like, well, again, can't own more than 100%. So, for the person who owns 50, do they own 20% of the company or do they own half of the company? I mean, it gets tricky to figure out what that really looks like. Do you stop after the 101st share and the rest of the people don't get their interest? Or do you have to like re-divvy up the cap table? I mean, there's all kinds of tricky issues that can happen. And Matt talked about this a little bit, but there's the, you know, the forgotten, you know, founder. You know, we always encounter situations where people have it semi-documented somewhere that somebody was supposed to get something. You know, it's an email. Somebody was going to get 10% of the company, and you know, but it's never followed up. It's not taken care of. It's like, okay, well, 10% as of when? 10% as of, you know, inception of the company, when, you know, 10% was worth $1, or 10% today, like when Facebook was about to go public, right? I mean, that was the big issue. They had a web designer, right? Is that what he was? I think that's what he was. Faisal, you might know. What was he, a web designer? I forget what he was. But anyways, he had an agreement in an email that he was to get 10% of the company for like putting up the website or something. You know, I wouldn't have minded having that email in my file. You know, I think it was like a year or so before they went public. It was when they announced, but before they went public. I think it got settled, but I mean, that's an expensive mistake.
Yeah, all these things that we're talking about here, this is all the not fun part of starting a company, right? Because everyone has their creative ideas, everyone has all the energy. You know, that's the fun part of it. But what you need to understand is with that fun part comes the not so fun part that is just as important, because you can have the greatest idea, but if your whole company like comes down like a house of cards, no investor wants to touch that with a 10-foot pole, because they see that the disaster, the wake of bodies behind you, from not keeping records and everything else.
Which, speaking of investors and capitalization, we are on to our next topic. Okay, who's asleep? Come on, do we need to do a 7th inning stretch? Do everybody need to get up and walk around?
So just real quick, I mean, I think to defend the entrepreneurs a little bit here, a lot of times you just don't have the personnel or the time, since you're pretty much doing everything.
Absolutely.
To sit there to do the record keeping, and things, you just get caught all of a sudden with not having done it properly. And I think that is a little bit of that's the trap that entrepreneurs fall into, right? Because you're just running all day long and all this administrative stuff and all this stuff that you should be doing.
Well, it's way more important to get your beta done, right? I mean, and absolutely. Our message and what Faisal, and meanwhile, Faisal was smart. He started his companies with fellow lawyers.
Yeah.
so he didn't have to pay anybody.
Yeah. He is a lawyer. He just doesn't.
He is a lawyer.
The first person to get
As is
Jefferson.
Jefferson did the same thing.
Yeah.
He left the law and started a company, so he didn't have to pay anybody either. But not everybody has that luxury, and we're not lobbying, to go get lawyers. We're just simply pointing out that some of these mistakes can be costly, and if you're at least somewhat aware of them, knowledge is power, right? And so you can be a little bit more, knowledgeable about some of these things, or hopefully, we haven't scared you sufficiently to never start a company.
Do you want to flip to the next one? So there's two reasons why you want to make sure that you have enough capital or money in your company. The first is we've talked again about this, the personal liability that can attach to it. So, courts have basically said, if you completely undercapitalize your company, so that there's just not nearly enough money in it, and you're out there doing business, that potentially you could get whacked with personal liability. So that's the first reason. The second reason is you want to actually focus on the widget that you're developing. And the last thing you want to be is a full-time fundraiser chasing money all the time. I think every entrepreneur, CEO, they probably spend way more time on that than they would care to, but you got to be strategic about it. At a minimum, you got to be strategic and understand, okay, so I'm going to need, my business plan says that, over the course of the next 6 months, I'm going to need X amount of dollars. Or over the course of the next year, to get to this next milestone, I need $1 million. Why not go after that entire $1 million, all at once, rather than piecemeal over the entire year, so that all of your time is spent, fundraising. Feel like you're on a roadshow constantly. So, we always talk to clients and try to sit them down, and we're certainly not, valuation experts or accountants, but we at least try to help them see the big picture of, what do you need to get to? And how much money is that going to take, and then go after that.
And when we say develop a business plan, just to be clear, we're not advocating or taking a position on whether you need a hard copy business plan or whatnot. We're simply saying you need to have a vision. You need to have a plan. You need to know how much money you need to have.
Yeah, and the best person to know that are the people developing the widget. You're the experts. You know what you're trying to accomplish. And you know how much that'll take. So, it's good to kind of circulate and get out there and try to, talk to experts about it, but you yourselves are the best people to know, what that's going to take. So, speaking of developing a solid funding strategy, that's what we're going to kind of talk about next. As Matt, started us on the topic, I mean, it's very important to develop your funding strategy. How are you, until your company starts making money and you can fund it the old-fashioned way by revenues, you need to think about, how do I get to revenues? How long is that going to take? What's going to be required to get me there? So, here's some things to think about. How much do you already have? So, for some of you guys who are participating in this, you'll win, and you'll
maybe get some funding out of that. And you need to be thinking ahead of time, okay, well, how much is that? How much are we going to put in? And then how long is that, where's that going to take us to? You know, where does that get us to? We always have a lot of clients come in and they're like, we're going to go raise, we're going to go raise, we're going to go raise. How much are they going to raise, Matt? What's the magic number?
I don't know.
$1 million. It's $1 million. It's $1 million. It's always $1 million. It's $1 million. It's more than a six-figure number, but it still feels like it's safe, right? And we always ask them, we're like, what's $1 million get you? What's $1 million get you? And they're like, I don't know. Money. You know, it's like, yeah, but investors want to know, what does that number mean to you? What does it mean to your company? Here are some bad answers. Bad answers are things like, it'll pay me because I'm not getting a salary. Investors don't want to hear that. What they want to hear is, hey, this $100,000, this $10,000, this $1 million, whatever the number is, it's going to get us to proof of concept. It's going to get us these 3 customer accounts. It's going to allow us to facilitate these 5 POs, or whatever it is. They want to know where the money gets you to. You know, what's that next milestone in the business?
And investors, you know, you might call them a calloused bunch, but they really are not interested in paying for your kids' private school tuition.
They don't care.
They want you to eat beans and rice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what they care about is their money going to fund the widget and making it successful.
And getting more back.
Yeah.
You know, here's the dirty little secret. All they care about is getting more money from the dollar they gave you. They are investing. I mean, what we always tell clients is, so imagine there's 100 piggy banks lined up, and they've got $1. They're making a choice which piggy bank to stick their $1 in, and they're going to pick the piggy bank that's going to not only spit their dollar back, but it's going to spit the biggest X return on that. I mean, it's really that simple. I mean, they will resonate with what you're doing, but they don't really care how you did it. They don't care how you got there. And I don't mean that to mean that they're passionate. They're just making the decision because they could put it in the stock market. They could, put it in another company. They have choices, and that's the decision they're making. And a lot of times we find out entrepreneurs, they take it personally. You know what I mean? Like, no, they're looking for a return. And that's what your job is. Your job is to convince them that you're the next, sliced bread, and you're going to be able to not only get them their money back, but you're going to be able to get them some nice return on it. I mean, it's really that simple. So we already kind of talked about this. And then what milestones will you reach? I mean, again, it's just really important to tie the number, the funds that you need, to actual pivots in your business. What does it really get you? So here's some kind of, fun, and you guys, you all got our presentation, right? I think Carrie sent, I saw her send it out, but it was blind to everybody. So I just want to make sure that you actually have these like checklists and stuff, because I don't want to, waste everyone's time right now. But there's just some kind of, best practice. Is that a yes or?
We don't know.
Okay. I saw it go out. I'm just not sure. Well, I'm sure we can get it to you.
I meant for
We got it.
Okay.
Nobody asked you either.
So here's just some kind of, best practices. And I mean, this isn't super relevant to you today, but as you get the taste of entrepreneurism and you want to do this in the future, you need to, a lot of people use people to go help them find money, okay? And there's people that are licensed, they're called brokers, and then there's people that are unlicensed. And it's really important to know the difference between using somebody who's licensed and using someone who's unlicensed, because you can use unlicensed people in certain circumstances, but it's a really narrow sliver, and if you do it wrong, the net result is you have to give your money back to the investors. And so that could be costly because likely you've spent the money, and the money's gone, and the finder's gone, and so it could turn into a nasty situation. So you just want to, if anyone's going to help you find money, just make sure you kind of understand the parameters to that. Here's one that's really kind of interesting, and this in and of itself could be a topic that could go on for weeks, so I'm not going to bore you with it. But here's the general rule that people don't understand. If you're going to sell an interest in your company, The law is that you have to register it on a public exchange. That's the law. The law is no matter when I'm selling a piece of my company, I need to register it. That means when you see Microsoft, Micron, all these companies, they're on public exchanges, okay? You need to find an exemption from public registration. So the law is not, oh, I'm a private company, so ergo, I don't need to register. The law is actually, I have to register unless I've found an exemption, okay? So that's kind of a little step that people tend to miss. And so we spend a lot of our time making sure that the companies have availed themselves of the right exemption. There is likely an exemption, but some of these exemptions require you to file things with either the state or the federal governing agencies. And if you miss those, it could create issues. So that's just something to know, and I'm not going to talk more on that because that's just a very, very loaded topic. But part of it is to know your potential investor. It's a legal term, accredited, unaccredited. There's a legal magic to whether somebody's accredited. There's boxes they can check. Is their net worth over $1 million? If they're a trust, is it over $5 million? I mean, are they part of the company? I mean, there's a checklist of things that make someone accredited versus unaccredited. And it's an important distinction to the person who's investing in your company, because if they're accredited, then the exemptions are more generous. If they're unaccredited, the law protects kind of a fool should not be parted with their money kind of concept. And so there's a lot of other hurdles that you need to go through if somebody's unaccredited. So this is where companies will get into trouble because, who's the first person you're going to ask for money in your company? Family, friends, fools, the 3 Fs. Friends, families, fools, that's what we call them. And, they're not always accredited, but they're the ones that believe in you, right? I mean, they're the ones that are going to most likely give you money. So it's just something to think about when you're kind of creating your company and thinking about how am I going to fund it.
All right, we're running short on time, so we're going to speed through these last two. This is an important one, particularly for you guys. And thankfully, B-Launch has already set up the program in a way that protects your IP. So IP, what is intellectual property? Well, it's a lot of things, right? It's patents, it's trademarks, it's copyrights, it's trade secrets, it's know-how. And all of these things are very, very important to your company and to your idea, okay? And it's very important that you protect that IP. I was talking with Dave, and we're going to date ourselves perhaps a little bit, but he was suggesting a video clip of the movie Twister, right? Right. And in the movie Twister, if anyone remembers that, there's 2 different teams. There's the team that's like all bootstrapped and homely and doing it themselves, and then there's the really well-funded team. And the well-funded team essentially steals the idea of sending these little probes up into the tornado, and there's this confrontation between the two, and the rich guy team says something along the lines of, well, it was an unrealized idea. It's
i.e. unprotected.
I.e. unprotected, that's exactly right. So what we try to help new entrepreneurs do and new companies is to protect that IP, whether that means filing a patent with the USPTO or a trademark with the USPTO, filing a copyright, which more and more people are doing on their software code. There's lots of things people can do to protect their IP, but it's very important that you talk with an IP lawyer early on in the process to make sure it's protected. And then there's lots of little simple things you can do, like non-disclosure agreements, right? Not disclosing too much of your idea to people who you don't know or not comfortable with. So there's lots of those things you can do, but it's just important to think about. To always keep in the back of your mind, am I protecting my IP properly? Let's see here.
So here's our last topic, implications of employees, consultants, and compensation. The really important point on this one is to make sure you distinguish And this kind of dovetails with what Matt was just saying. But you know, as you have people, as your company grows and you have people come to work for you, one, you want to make sure that everyone signs, you know, some form of NDA and assignment of invention, because you want to make sure as they're creating things in your company, the company actually owns it, and that they're not creating stuff. And so have they signed their little? They signed, right? So you guys signed a similar type of agreement to be part of the program. I just wasn't sure if you signed it. And the idea is that the entity will own, you know, the IP. It's property, and you want to make sure that your employees and your consultants also do that. But there's also different aspects of the relationship, you know, with employees and consultants. People come and work for you, and you want to consider whether you have some kind of offer of employment or contract. If for no other reason than to be clear in what is their role in the company going to be. What are your expectations? What are their expectations? Are we having a meeting of the mind of why I'm hiring you? You know, the other thing is that when you hire people, you want to confirm that they don't have any non-competes or other kinds of arrangements that they may have signed with their prior employer that you're actually interfering with. And that becomes a problem, because if you're aware of an employee working for you or a consultant working for you, and they have some kind of what we call a restrictive covenant with a prior employer, and you have knowledge of it, it becomes your problem too. You now could be the subject of a lawsuit if that prior employer wants to enforce their rights. And that, I mean, who wants to hire someone and inherit a lawsuit? I mean, it's just not fun. You know, I'm not sure how much our you know, CPA friends will talk about this, but you know, something that you want to be clear about with your employees, and we're getting a little granular here, but you know, who are the people who work for you? Are they a contractor? You know, or are they an employee, and therefore I have to, you know, withhold taxes and take some extra steps because they're an employee. And it's really important, because what we see a lot of startups do is kind of just dodge that question altogether and call everyone contractors. And you know, the IRS tends to have a different view of that, and you just don't want to get caught in the middle of it. So you just want to kind of be sensitive to that. And then the last point being, you know, seek, you know, any kind of human resource advice before you hire or terminate. I mean, it could be as simple as talking to somebody, you know, real quickly. I mean, we have clients all the time who are, you know, afraid to fire certain people because they're worried about their, you know, their class, their religion, you know, different kinds of things that they think are going to create issues. Yet they do other stuff with other folks that were like, oh, why didn't you call us? You know what I mean? You should have called us. I mean, so sometimes there's a lot of circumstances that it's not always intuitive. Sometimes you can fire that person. That's not an issue. But you might be, you know, more sensitive about other stuff. So a lot of times people can give you advice in 2-3 minutes. I mean, people who have that kind of experience, you know, don't need to spend a lot of time on it. We'll probably talk a little bit more about this when we're with you, you know, in your groups. But, you know, we touched on equity compensation earlier. I mean, it's a natural way for companies to incentivize employees, right? You want to not just give them a paycheck, but if you're creating a disruptive, you know, company that has potential for growth, it's exciting to share the upside with your employees. But it's really important that you create your equity compensation plan the right way. There's both IRS and securities laws that you want to make sure that you comply with, where there could be some really interesting results. For example, and we're not going to get into this right now, but 409A is something, I don't know how many people understand what 409A is, but if you don't structure some of your equity compensation arrangements the right way, you create, on top of a normal tax situation, a 20% penalty for the company, a 20% penalty for the employee, and in the great state of California, an additional 5% penalty. So people will end up spending like 90 to 95% taxes if it's not set up the right way. So I'm not sure about you, but I would like to keep more than 95% of my dollar. So you just want to be sensitive to that and make sure it's set up the right way.
All right. that's essentially it. This is the summary of what we've talked about. But I think we probably have at least a couple of minutes for questions. So feel free. Is there anything we've talked about that you have a question about?
Mr. Jewell in the back.
So I have a question about, I think Philo's point about how you're really busy and everything early on, and it's also a non-revenue generating activity for the company. And so one question I had people ask me before is, okay, when does it get real? So that I need to worry about number 1, and number 2, and number 3, and number 4. Because there's somewhere between, okay, we all were at a bar and we wrote, or for your high school kids, the library.
We were all at Jamba
Okay,
Juice.
sorry.
And
But anyway, we're at a gathering place, socially, and we have an idea on a napkin. So you don't need to run out and form an entity then. And then the other end of the spectrum is, okay, now we've got revenue and we've got employees and we've decided that we all hate each other. Somewhere between here and here, it gets real and it's time to form an entity early. What's like a tripwire that you could recommend to people that it's like, okay, now it's worth it, right? You don't need to spend the money tonight at the social gathering with the napkin, but when is a good time that you ought to run out and do it?
yeah, it's a really great question, Jewell Jefferson.
Whatever. Okay, Rocky.
We're like that. Okay, so like the conservative lawyer view is going to be, you should have started before you walked into the gathering place, right? Because the reality is it's never too soon. The question is, how much are you going to pay and set aside for legal, or go get free resources or talk to people? I mean, there's plenty of free resources out there. So I think the academic answer is it's never too soon to be sensitive to the legal issues. The question is, what's the priority list, right? What's the priority? The reason why I kind of popped up to here is, so for example, we've got a site on our website. It's a jump-off site called Startup Percolator, and you can go start a Delaware C Corp for free. I mean, you go fill out the questionnaire, it generates some documents, and it's kind of like LegalZoom for free. And there's some other stuff on there like term sheet generators, and there's all kinds of products like that out there that you can kind of do some basic free stuff. In your example, the things that jump out at me are, okay, so now what happens 6 months later when somebody ran with the idea, and the other 2 people who were hanging out are like, well, wait a minute, that was my idea too. I don't know, was it? Like, do we need to stick their name on the patent too if you went and patented it? I mean, I don't know. Were they part of the idea? Were they not part of the idea? So unfortunately, I think part of the answer is it's never too soon to think about the legal. I think the real question is, but how much do you pay, right? How much are you willing to spend? Because you can spend a lot, but there's certain things that you just don't want to pay short shrift. I mean, and honestly, it's probably 3 or 4 of the things. I mean, you want to create your entity early, you want to protect your IP. I mean, those are definitely the top 2 things that you want to do.
But, so if somebody calls you after that gathering and they say, all right, last night it was great, we think this is terrific, and it's too early, right? I mean, do either one of you ever say to somebody, hey, look, this is great, why don't you think about it some more and come back in a month? Because there is this perception that when I call a lawyer, it like sets off this relentless work and billing machine, and it's going to cost me a lot of money and I can't stop it.
Well, I mean, that's absolutely true.
A meter.
I mean, we do it all the time, actually. Someone will come in for that initial meeting, and before we sign an engagement letter with them, before we charge anything to them, they'll kind of walk us through what their idea is, and all the time we give them what we have. It's called a questionnaire, our corporate questionnaire. And we give them this questionnaire, and we say, listen, okay, so you got this idea, you've got a couple of buddies, you want to start this company. Take this questionnaire, which has all kind of the definitive things we would need to know about your new company. Take that, take a couple of weeks or whatever, think about it, discuss it with your buddies. Once you're ready to get going, come back to us, and we'll have that conversation and get you set up. So, I mean, I think most lawyers would be like that, where they want you to think about it first. They want you to come to you with at least pretty concrete ideas of what you want. And then all the time too, people come back with a questionnaire and say, hey, we got some of this filled out, but some of the stuff we don't understand what it means. And so we'll sit down and walk them through and help them kind of figure it out.
Yeah, we spend hours with people before we even engage them a lot of times. Because everyone's always like, well, I still have 15 minutes left on my first hour, don't I? And like, we're not really keeping track that way. Because, I mean, for us, I mean, it's not worth it. I mean, we're interested in helping clients long term, real companies that are going to do something. I mean, for a firm like ours, creating a company, it's not, we spend way more time than it costs them, so it's lost leader work. You know what I mean? It's not worth it. But being part of the excitement and sitting down and talking to them about their idea and the different things, a lot of times what we'll do with clients, Jefferson, is we roadmap it. You know what I mean? We put a little roadmap together and we prioritize, their legal needs. If they come to us and they say, oh, I want to give equity away, I'm like, well, how many people? Well, just one right now. Okay, great. Well, then we don't need to do an equity plan yet. You know what I mean? Let's think about that when we're talking, and we've got a number of folks you want to do that. That's not a high priority right now. But you've got a patent that you showed at a trade, well, laws changed a little bit on this, but you have a patent and you presented your product at a trade show 363 days ago. Well, like, we need to get on the phone with the patent lawyer because we got to file something in like 36 hours. You know what I mean? So that is a priority right now. So it just depends on the circumstances. I mean, we try to prioritize for folks, but of course the perception is that we don't.
So I think that the one thing that probably confounds, there's probably something that's going to come up with the Elon program is valuation. That's what confounds all the entrepreneurs. You're getting ready to sell your company, or you're trying to bring money in. How do I value it? I may not be making any money, but I think that it's worth $2 million. Can I tag it at $2 million? I mean, what are some of the issues that come up in terms of valuation that I should be aware of, when I get out there?
So, but which part do you want us to tackle first? What happens because I've said it's worth $10 million now and it's really
not? Or just tell me how I can value. I mean, what should some of the things I should be thinking about in terms of valuation? I mean, we all struggle with that, and that seems to be the thing that almost every entrepreneur struggles with. I mean, tell me how I can value my company. Is it based on what I've put in? Is it based on revenue? What is it based on?
Timing is funny because Melanie and I just wrote an article on this together. So the best way, or the most scientific way we can come up with is if you lick your finger, you just kind of put it up.
Do you play the air is blowing?
Yeah, that's no. I mean, it's really tricky, right? And really, when you boil it all down, there's no scientific way to value a startup, right? And it's a difficult thing for every startup who's going after financing or investor money to try to nail down what the right valuation is. And what we tell people is the valuation is whatever anyone's willing to invest into your company. I mean, the market is the best gauge of your value as anything. Now, there's certainly things you can do to try to back up your valuation. So, whether it's revenue, but typically not for a new startup. It's more of, okay, let's look at what other companies in our space have done and what we are trying to do to disrupt that space, and what's the valuation for something early on. There's lots of resources out there and websites on valuation. We're not valuators ourselves, but typically what we tell people is, your valuation is whatever someone will pay for it, and if you can prepare a valuation, have enough evidence to back it up, and someone's willing to pay that amount, that's your valuation.
And I think that it's important to know, what stage your company's in, what industry are you in, and part of Faisal, I think where you're going with this is to, you have to start with something, but you also can't get wedded to it. You need to be flexible if it means that somebody else the person who's investing in your company is certainly going to have a different perspective on valuation than you are. Because they're going to want more for their money, and you're going to want to give them less. So there's going to be a natural tension there. The other thing we see, entrepreneurs do is it's hard to kind of tether the balloon, because of course their idea is amazing and it's just going to like sail off into the sunset. But the reality is somebody's going to put real money into the company. They're going to want more than like 0.5% for $1 million in a company that doesn't have any revenues yet. I mean, that's just the reality. They're not, even if you could be the next Snapchat or whatever you think your, invention is, in reality, there's like, 1 million other companies that have also gotten funding at far more grounded valuations. And it's important to know. I mean, to answer your technical question, there's all kinds of experts who can help you. But the best test for valuation is, as Matt said, what's somebody willing to give you. I mean, the market is the best indicator of true market value.
And you see this tension all the time, like it's Shark Tank. If you watch Shark Tank, I mean, that's the issue that comes up every time, right, is the valuation. I mean, they throw out a valuation and then everyone picks it apart. It's the whole drama of the show.
And between them, they never agree, right? And they're all consummate experts, right? So there is no perfect magic formula. But understanding your business and coming up with a sound plan, projections, and creating what you think is your value is a good starting point. It gets the dialogue rolling.
Especially early on, as we're discussing roles and contributions, especially in a group that's 6 or 7 people, the larger, the more difficult that conversation is, the more knockdown, drag out, WWF it becomes. But what happens if the roles reverse? What legal things do you have to go through if somebody needs to pull out, yet they had a piece of it, or they take on a different role and responsibility and their equity changes? How difficult is that to do, or does it stay solid until the entire makeup of the company changes?
Do you mean specifically in this program, or just in
just in general? So just in general, how hard does it change?
It's part of, we always liken it to a prenup. We always say you wanna understand the escape features of any relationship as you're getting into the relationship. So there's a lot of different tools that are available to address it. So that's why a lot of employers have vesting, for example. I mean, the idea is if I'm in a company for, a standard vesting arrangement could be, nothing the first year, and then basically 1/36 for each month over the next 3 years, meaning over a 4-year period of time, whatever that interest is, I vest into it. And the idea is, hey, if I've gutted it out and I've been there for a certain period of time, then okay. If I leave, I've earned into that piece, so if I've left after year 2 or 3, I've earned into that like 50%, 75%, whatever it is. So that's one way that employers can kind of, deal with it. Other people link things to milestones. I mean, if you have we see it a lot with the IP people in companies. If you've got somebody that you have a very specific requirement, you want them to develop your beta. And if they don't develop your beta, they were of no value to your company. Then time vest really is irrelevant, right? I mean, then tie it to the beta. Tie it to that being developed. So there's different things that you can do there.
But if you do nothing, I mean, it's ownership, right? Like if you give someone 100 shares, and that's it, right? You give someone 100 shares, and 3 weeks later they say, "I'm not interested anymore in being a part of this company." You already gave away 100 shares.
Yeah, in the absence of any kind of repurchase agreement, any kind of buyback, they own 100 shares, and you're stuck with them.
Yeah, they're a shareholder of the company. So, as Melanie said, there's lots of tools we use in the documentation, whether it's a right of repurchase from the company if they walk away, investing. There's lots of tools we can do to minimize that, but it's property, right? You can't just
Yeah, in the absence
take
of
the
the
ball and
tools.
go home.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. It would be really nice if it was simple, but lives change and things happen, so I'm just curious about that process. Thank you.
It's never simple. That's why we're still gainfully employed standing up here. So have we sufficiently scared you into not starting your businesses?
Just
Nah, you shouldn't be scared. You just need to be aware. It's like anything.
to bookend sort of the first question, boom, people, this gathering has decided that they're going to go out and do something. Then they decide to talk to their attorney friends and say, okay, friends, we want to get this process started. How many times process starts and then half a year later it is all?
Oh,
Because we
gosh.
talk about, you know,
Probably more than, it depends on where you're talking about in the timeline.
Sure, because there's various places where something is happening.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. You're going to throw out some statistic.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on where, you know, we don't always like to think of it as failing
Right.
as much as, you know, maybe
Learning.
learning, deciding to move in a different direction, you know. It's not you, it's us. You know, there's different inflection points. And, you know, offline, you know, I could regale you with some of them, but, you know, we can start to see them coming. There's patterns that happen. So to Matt's point, you have the people who come in, we give them the questionnaire, 50% of them come back, right? I mean, there's a group that just, you know, maybe it's not 50%. There's a group that are like, oh my gosh, thank you. You know, and then there's a group that kind of go forward. You know, the next inflection point is the ones that just can't get out of neutral. You know what I mean? They're toiling around. They can't figure out how to divvy up their ownership. And, you know, in the interim, the market's passed them by, right? You know, it just, you know, the idea, because they can't figure out their arrangement. They get too bogged down in it. The next big one is undercapitalization. That's the huge one. I mean, companies are just always undercapitalized.
It costs money.
It costs
Start a
money.
company.
It costs money to start, and you know, people get very excited, and then somebody has shot through their savings. You know, I mean, we all have different lengths of time that we can work for free, right? And so that's where the wheels start to come off the cart, because it always takes longer to start a company and bootstrap than you can ever imagine. And it's like reverse dog years, you know what I mean? It's like, you're like, you know, just, you know. So that's really the next big one. You know, and then we get the consummate fundraisers who are just always, you know, chasing the next dollar, and that's really hard. It's hard for entrepreneurs to become professional fundraisers. And I'm sure there's a bunch that, and then we have happy exits.
Yeah, yeah.
Or fire exits. We got those too. You just start parceling off the doors and everything. You're just liquidating.
Anything
Okay,
else?
doesn't that make you want to go out and start a company? Yeah.
All
Well,
of
you know-
those hard experiences, though, they do make up for it. When you do see a company from start to finish, it is fun to watch. Not only, I mean, because we start feeling like we are a part of it, even though, you know, we're the hired guns, we're the service professionals, helping them along the way.
It's easy for us to wax philosophic. We're sitting in the ivory tower. I mean, don't listen to us. I mean, we're
That's
sitting up there, you know, it's easy for us to pontificate. Think about it this way. Like, who in here skis? Right? Like, do you not know what could happen to you when you strap, you know, slick pieces of, you know, whatever it is nowadays, fiberglass, on and go down a hill, right? But you still do it. You still do it. You enjoy the ride, right? You go for it. You go for it. I mean, there's no greater reward than building a company and you know, creating something and creating value and, you know, creating jobs for people and doing all that kind of stuff. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. It's not. It's not easy. Don't kid yourself. It's not easy. But the rewards are worth the journey, for sure. Besides, who wants to be slugs like us? We don't have any fun. We're boring.